Hello, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my top 10 best books of 2023. In all of the years that I have made kind of best ofs, like end of the year best ofs, I have never had more than a top 6, and usually that's super easy for me. But this year, there were so many standout books. I feel like there was sort of a dichotomy with my reading. I read a lot of stuff that was like 2 stars, but I read a lot of good 5-star reads as well. And so I had to expand this list and make it a full top 10. So I'm going to be talking to you about my favorite books that I read this year, the ones that really made the cut. If you want to see books that were like honorable mentions, books that didn't quite make the cut, go check out my Goodreads 2023 shelf, filter by rating, and you can like find some other stuff to read. But I'm going to talk to you about my favorites, the ones that really stood out to me. First up, we have a book that I feel like I talked about a lot when I first read it because I was just in a haze, and I feel like I haven't talked about it much since, but it definitely deserves a place on this list, and that is In a Jam by Kate Canterbury. This is a book that I feel like I saw here and there on Instagram before picking it up, but I won't lie, the cover didn't totally appeal to me because I feel like I really couldn't tell much from the cover, like what this book was going to be, the vibe of this book. This one kind of gives typical small town romance vibes, but it also is so much more than that. It's about our main characters, Shay and Noah. Shay inherits a tulip farm from either her step-aunt or step-grandmother who is now deceased, and to fulfill the requirements of the will to fully inherit this tulip farm that she kind of grew up on in like her later years, like when she was like in high school, I believe, she needs to marry someone and stay married for a year. And this is kind of tricky because at the beginning of the book, Shay finds herself in a pickle because I believe she kind of gets left at the altar. She doesn't end up marrying the man she thought she was going to marry. So her head's not really in the right place romantically, but she ends up falling pretty quickly for the guy that she's going to fake marry. Noah. I mean, it's a real marriage, but like, you know, it's just for the contract, or is it? Noah is someone who has kind of pined for Shay for a while, and I don't think she really saw that when they were back in high school. They did know each other in school, but they weren't like best friends or anything. At the beginning of the book, he has a little bit of animosity towards her for his own reasons, and then as the story carries on, he's just very much obsessed with her and is very much like my wife all the time. It's pretty hot. It's pretty sweet. I really liked the dynamic between Shay and Noah. I liked seeing how their relationship progressed, and I liked seeing both of the characters kind of grow individually as well. They both have their own weaknesses and things that they need to kind of like work through, and I feel like they do throughout the course of the story. And in addition, Noah is actually a single parent. He is in charge of his niece. I think his sister's in prison or something like that, and the niece is fucking hilarious. She provides a lot of comic relief, which is just so charming. Like, there were so many elements of the story that I think worked. Again, it kind of has small town romance vibes, kind of has Gilmore Girl vibes to it, but it's just so much more than that. I really enjoyed the story, and I think a lot of y'all would too if you're looking for something that is sexy and romantic. Next up is a book that I'm sure is going to wind up on a lot of people's best of list, but I would be remiss if I didn't put The Right Move by Liz Tomford on the list. So this book is about Ryan and Indy. Ryan is an NBA player who isn't really seen as much of a team player by his GM. He really thought that he was going to easily get the team captain position, which I believe comes with a little bit of extra pay, but he is kind of overlooked for this because not a lot of people see him as a team player, right? Like, he doesn't have kind of what it takes, I guess, to be a leader, and part of that is that he doesn't really have a personal life outside of his job, and that's important, right? Like, you need to be a well-rounded person, you need to be a good example for others. Ryan's just not that guy, okay? Nice guy, but just like not that guy. And so he enlists the help of his new roommate, Indy, to fake date him and kind of show that he is like the family man that the GM wants him to be, right? And Indy has troubles of her own. She is dealing with a semi-recent, I believe, infertility diagnosis, and also her boyfriend of many years who she thought she would marry breaks up with her, and she has to move out of their apartment, and she doesn't really know where she's going to live. So her best friend is like, hey, my brother's actually looking for a roommate, and actually he's not really looking for a roommate, but like, you could live with him, right? You could live with him. You can't live with me because like I'm living with my boyfriend, but like you would live with my brother. And Indy's like, well, he is kind of sexy. I think I'll sign up for that. That sounds very nice. And so she does. And the relationship that's built between them is just so deeply romantic. That is a phrase that I feel like I say too often, but that really is what I'm looking for in a romance. I want it to be romantic. I don't necessarily need it to be over the top smutty with like, you know, as many sex scenes as can fill the pages. I want a story where the relationship is built over time to where when there is a sex scene, I'm like panting for it, like I'm so ready. And that was definitely the case here. There's so many like will they, won't they moments, and Ryan is exactly what you want from a hero. He notices things about Indy that she doesn't notice about herself. He makes coffee for her every morning, even though he doesn't enjoy coffee. He, at the end of the book, buys her a house. Like, he's just the perfect man, and he understands and anticipates Indy's needs. And that's just like the hallmark of a good fucking romance, okay? This book was excellent, phenomenal, 10 out of 10, 5 stars. Pick it up if you haven't already. Let's talk about just my type. This is a book that I feel like has kind of flown under the radar. I don't think I hear too many people talk about this one, but this book is about Lana and Seth. They both work at a online publication that's being acquired, I believe, by like a newspaper. And this is a really great opportunity for the both of them, except for they're going to be competing for whoever is going to get the column in the newspaper kind of thing, I think. Maybe it's an online publication, I'm not entirely sure. But the competition they're going to undergo to see like who's gonna win is a very interesting one. Basically, Lana is someone who's been in a string of long-term relationships. Seth is sort of like never in relationships and just kind of like sleeps around. And so they're gonna kind of like swap roles, right? Lana is going to write a column about being single and happy with it, and then Seth is going to try to find a long-term relationship in his column. And they're gonna write new articles every week, I should say. Every week, every couple days, I'm not entirely sure what the timeline is here, but they compete, and whoever gets the most likes or shares or whatever is going to win. And it is so fun, especially since these two have a past and used to date each other in high school. I love this story. I love a good second chance romance. I used to hate them, but I feel like I just hadn't read good ones yet, you know? And this one is so sweet and so darling and so romantic, and watching these two kind of fall back in love with each other is everything that I didn't know that I needed. I also just loved the way the story was told. I liked that our heroine kind of figures out her career goals as the story goes on, and vice versa too. Like, they both kind of undergo their own journeys of character growth and discovery, and also like career development as well, which I like. I want my characters to have like a whole life that is on the page and that feels real, and I feel like Lana's journey was just fantastic, and again, so deeply romantic. I loved this book, and I think this is one that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, so if you're looking for something on this list that like you haven't picked up, I'm sure it's this one. Pick this one up. It's really, really good. Switching gears a little bit, let's talk about a book that is not a romance. There are a couple of books on this list, shockingly, that aren't romances. First up, we have a mystery thriller by Lisa Duell. None of this is true. This book was so surprising and so juicy and exactly what I needed at the exact time that I read it. It is about Josie and Alex, who are birthday twins. Alex is a very successful woman. She has a couple of kids. She has a husband. She's very like well-to-do and has a life that she loves, right? The podcast that she has, by the way, is one where she interviews very successful women about how they got to where they are. She's kind of in a rut. She's like not really sure where to take the podcast. She feels like she's done everything she can do until she's approached by her birthday twin one night at dinner, right? So she's like out with her friends and celebrating her 40th birthday, I believe. And she is in the bathroom when a woman approaches her and is like, hey, I overheard it was your birthday. It's actually my birthday too. I think we're birthday twins. Like, we have the same birthday. We're turning the same age. Like, she just kind of like randomly introduces herself. Her name is Josie. And we learn at the beginning of the story that she is there with just her husband. And maybe her life is not quite as magical as Alex's. Then the two women run into each other again after this like one chance encounter. Alex sees that there's more to Josie than meets the eye, and she's like, okay, maybe this could be a new thing for my podcast where I interview someone who's like on the cusp of change, on the cusp of being a successful woman, right? And in their interviews, basically Alex interviewing Josie, she starts uncovering how interesting this woman's life is, and she's also starting to question like, who is this person that I'm letting into my house? It is so good. You get like clips of the podcast interviews. You also get, I think, both women's points of view. Maybe it's just Josie's, but I'm pretty sure it's both women. It's so creepy. The entire book just leaves you feeling totally unsettled, and as things carry on, it becomes like less believable but also more believable. It's so twisted. It's so juicy. It's so good. I think a lot of people enjoyed this one from what I can tell from the overall rating for this book. But if you have yet to pick up this book and you're kind of like putting it off, I would really recommend it, because I think this is a mystery thriller that feels different than anything I've ever read before, so I highly recommend it. Another mystery thriller, actually, do them back to back, is The Whispers by Ashley Audrain. This one's like more of a literary mystery, I guess you could call it. The story is about a whole host of different women. It's told from multiple different points of view, but at the beginning of the story, this woman is having a bunch of people in her neighborhood over to her house for her twin children's birthday. She has a set of twins who are like 3, I believe, and then a son who's like, let's say like 9 or 10. And he has always been a bit of a problem child. She doesn't get along super well with him, and at the party, in kind of a fit of rage, she screams at him, and everyone there hears it. It's very uncomfortable for everyone, and they'll just kind of like go about their days after that. They kind of pretend that it doesn't happen, because, you know, a lot of the time people scream at their kids. Maybe not a lot of the time, but it's not unusual, shall we say. And a lot of people just want to ignore it, right? Until this child falls out of a bedroom window, and people are questioning if the mom who screamed at her kid did this, right? This is like a couple of months later. And the story is told, again, from multiple women's points of view, people who know this woman, and it's all about their I guess, relationship with motherhood and their identity, and it's also about, could a mother be pushed to the brink to do this? It's more than that. There's definitely like a mystery element that I don't want to spoil in the story, but I love Ashley Audrain's unflinching look at motherhood and parenthood. I think it is something that is relatable to people. I'm not a parent yet, but I could see how people could take the actions of the characters in the story. I liked that each character who is involved has an interesting story to tell too. It wasn't like any of the points of view were uninteresting to read. I don't think you should pick this up if you're looking for something that's really twisty and turny. I feel like you kind of know what the answer is going to be to the story the entire time. It still took me by surprise, frankly, but I think this book is so good. I think it's so amazing. I will read probably anything Ashley Audrain publishes. I didn't like this quite as much as The Push, but I did find it to be ultimately very satisfying. I did see a couple of reviews that said like it was kind of slow moving at the beginning, so they DNF'd it, but I would urge you to push on because I think this book is ultimately pretty rewarding. And I think if you, I don't know, if you like Real Housewives, or like if you're just someone who likes to see people behaving badly, I think that you're gonna enjoy this book. Next up, another romance, of course. We have Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young. I loved this book. She is a new to me author, and this one really took me by surprise. I think because I am not an accidental pregnancy girly. I'm just not. I don't like the surprise pregnancy trope, but this changed my mind about that in a lot of ways. So it's about Win and Bo. They both have a limb difference, and they both meet each other at this Halloween party and kind of like bond over this, and they also hook up and have sex at this party, right? They don't ever really think they're going to see each other again. Primarily Win, she actually has a really good time and like wants to maybe connect with Bo after this, but he kind of just like leaves and they never see each other again until Win ends up pregnant and she has to like contact Bo and be like, hey, just so you know, like I'm keeping the baby, you don't have to be involved, sort of thing. And he's like, no, like I want to be a parent, like let's do this together. Whether or not we're like romantically involved, I want to be present in my child's life, which like of course is what we're gonna want in a romance, right? Like we want the guy to be involved, but obviously it's more than just him co-parenting with Win, right? It's like their relationship and seeing how it unfolds and how they come to a very like satisfying place even before the baby is born. I loved this. I thought it was deeply romantic. It is kind of slow moving. It's not maybe the most thrilling romance ever, but sometimes you just want to read something comforting, a book about acceptance. I just loved this. I loved how Win and Bo kind of like found home in each other. It was a delight. I really highly recommend it. All right, next up, we have a book that took me by surprise. This is maybe the most surprising book that I'm putting on the list because I read another book by this author last year for the Goodreads Choice Awards and I was like, nah, take it or leave it. 3 stars, fine. But it just like wasn't truly for me, right? Like I just felt like it was a little bit lacking in the romantic department, even though it was technically a romance, okay? This book, I read it again for the Goodreads Choice Awards, right? Like I didn't expect to see this author there twice, but you know, it happens. The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston, don't know how to say her last name, should probably look it up, was so fucking charming, and I think if I were really pressed to identify the best book that I read all year, I think it might be this one. This one had me by the fucking throat the entire time, and it did not let me go. I love that. Thank you so much, Ashley. I think you did that shit very well. So this book's about Clementine and Ewan, okay? Let's talk about what the book's actually about. It's about Clementine and Ewan. Clementine is kind of grieving because her aunt passed away, an aunt who she was really extremely close with. It's her mom's sister. Her aunt leaves her an apartment, and she doesn't really want to live there, even though it is in like a prime location in Manhattan. She doesn't really want to live there, but she is kind of begrudgingly living there, trying to figure out what she's going to do with the place, especially after I think she like broke up with a recent boyfriend and like needs a place to live. So she's like, okay, I'll begrudgingly live in this apartment, even though I'm like really grieving and just like really not having a good time. Things get interesting though, because her aunt always told her this apartment was magical, and she didn't really know what that meant until one day some random fucking man shows up in her apartment, and she's like, who the hell are you? What are you doing here? And she comes to realize that this apartment kind of can time travel, but only 7 years in the past, okay? So the heroine meets like the 7 years younger version of some man who's named Ewan, and she gets to see him at his best, basically. She gets to see him as this like struggling chef who really wants to make it and is really inspired by his grandfather, who I believe wanted to be a chef and just didn't really quite make it there. And so he is trying to like live his dreams and fulfill everything that he wants for himself, and also like what his grandfather would have wanted for him. I think his grandfather has passed away at this point, and they just really fall for each other. They tell each other their hopes and dreams, and this apartment becomes this place where Clementine feels safe and accepted and doesn't have to really think about her grief as much. And it is so sweet. I love the banter between these two as well. It's like funny and poignant and just all the things that you really want from a romance, even if grief is present. I don't always love grief being present in a romance, but like it didn't bother me in this case. And then in the present day, you also have Clementine trying to kind of figure out what she wants to do for a career, right? Like she's just trying to figure out how she is going to kind of get through the next little while, because again, her aunt passed away, she's not having a good time, and is her, I guess, detachment from her job, is that like a part of her, or is that just as a response to her grief? Is she just depressed, right? She has to kind of figure that out, and she also has to convince this famous chef that he should publish his book with their publishing company. She works at a publishing company. If that wasn't clear, it's everything. It's everything to me. It's charming, it's sweet, it's sexy. Again, it's got the banter, it's got the heart. I think this story is one that is overlooked. I know that there's some people out there who like this book, but I think if you're like me and you tend to gravitate towards indies, you might not necessarily want to pick this one up, right? Like you read the back and you're like, okay, gimmick. It's actually really great, and the magical element didn't piss me off. I didn't really enjoy the magical element in The Dead Romantics. I felt like it was, I don't want to say unbelievable, which it kind of was, obviously, because it's magic, you know? It can't be in real life. I just feel like having a dead hero kind of makes it hard for me to like root for the relationship. That wasn't the case here, right? Because this guy exists in real life. He's just like a little older. So I liked seeing the conclusion of things, the explanation of things, how there are like connections between little things. I'm gonna stop waxing poetic. Pick this book up. It's so good. All right, let's round out the video with the final 3 books, okay? A book that I don't think I anticipated being on this list, and a book that I don't think I vlogged, would be The Frontrunner by Elsie Silver. I read so many Elsie Silver books this year. I have read all of her backlist at this point. Every book she's published, I have read. So I don't know, if you like want a video on me talking about Elsie Silver books, let me know, or like I could talk about them in other videos. I'm not sure. Anyway, The Frontrunner is a book that's not in her Chestnut Springs series. It's in her Gold Rush Ranch series, which is her first published series, and it's about Stefan and Mira. Stefan is kind of the villain of the previous books in the series, which I think makes his redemption all the sweeter. He is seen as this guy who's very ruthless towards the horses that he, I guess, races, essentially. He doesn't ride the horses. He's not a jockey. He just like owns the horses. And he has a real passion for horses. He really enjoys them, but he is seen as treating them kind of inhumanely by the other people kind of in this world. And unfortunately, he needs help rehabbing a horse. And so he enlists the help of Mira, who is a vet in the area, and they fall in love, and it's pretty great while rehabbing a horse, I guess. So this is a very yeehaw, small town, horse girl romance. And if you're not into that, you're probably not gonna like this book, but I really liked it. I liked that Mira is this like very prickly heroine, and Stefan is this hero who is very misunderstood and kind of grumpy, but like thinks the sun shines out of Mira's ass. That's the kind of like grumpy hero that I personally like. I don't even know if I'd call him grumpy. I think I'd call her grumpy, and him, not sunshine, but like just like a misunderstood, like damaged boy at heart. I fucking eat that up. I just do every time, every fucking time. I think this series in general is kind of underrated. Don't get me wrong, I love Chestnut Springs, but I do think the romances in the Gold Rush Ranch series are really special, and I do think if you like horses and you like the horsey elements, I think you'll like this series maybe a little bit more because it's got more emphasis on that. I never thought I was a horsey girl, but here we are. Okay, moving on. All right, next up we have Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I am so glad to see that Abby Jimenez is getting the redemption arc that she deserves on my list. I just feel like the first 3 books I read by her were just not great. They just weren't for me. And then the last 2 books she's written have been like some of my favorite romances of all time. So I love to see that journey for her. Yours Truly is a special one, and it's one that I think frustrates some readers, but I thrive in frustration and I thrive in like real life kind of miscommunication. So this book's about Brianna and Jacob. Brianna is a very successful doctor. She's getting divorced, I believe, and she's not necessarily looking for love. She's trying to like keep her head down and like really, you know, get the job done and really just see a lot of, I guess, professional success. Unfortunately, she applies for a promotion where she's going to be like head of the ER or head of surgery, something like that, and she doesn't get the job because a man is hired instead. This kind of pisses her off. Of course, she's been working here for years. She's definitely deserving of this promotion, and her and Jacob, the guy who's hired to like basically take her job or take the promotion she wants, they kind of get off on the wrong foot, right? She kind of misunderstands him, thinks he's like this cold and aloof guy, but he ends up writing her a letter that's kind of like an apology letter and also kind of an explanation where she starts to kind of understand this man's character and maybe understand that there's more to him that meets the eye, and they strike up this friendship that turns into something more. I think some books don't need tropes. I think a lot of books don't need tropes to pull off a successful romance, and this book was so sweet. I love Jacob's character. He kind of hates himself, which is something that of course I'm a sucker for, and he also has mental health issues, which I think I like to see in men in romances because it's definitely something that exists and I don't think is talked about quite enough. Jacob is someone who's trying to kind of like work through his problems as well. I like seeing the things that these two kind of get into. This is maybe a spoiler, but I also don't think that pregnancy should be a spoiler because I think it could be triggering for some people. Brianna does get pregnant in the story, and that's something that the two of them kind of have to deal with and handle themselves. Decide like, are they going to stay together? Like, are they going to try to get married? That sort of thing. And I like the way that that's handled, right? It's like messy, it's real, it's raw, and ultimately I love where these two end up together. This one is similar to Part of Your World because again, it is messy. Like, life isn't perfect and there are things that don't necessarily always go right, but I think I like seeing that in romance, as long as it's not like too much of the story. So I liked it. I think you should pick it up if you haven't picked it up already. Lastly, let's let's talk about a book that actually won a Goodreads Choice Award this year, and it was one that was on my most anticipated of 2023 list that actually really lived up to the hype, and that would be Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I feel like I've talked about this book so much. I feel like I have said all I need to say about this book, but if you are unsure about what this book is about, Yellowface is about Athena and June. June has not had much success in writing, right? But her rival, who she went to Yale with, Athena has. Athena has published a book or two that have gained quite a bit of acclaim, and June's published a book and it was kind of a flop. Like, no one gave a fuck about her book. So when Athena dies, June, like the opportunist that she is, decides to steal Athena's unpublished manuscript and pass it off as her own, which is a little challenging because June's white and Athena's not. She kind of like takes on a more ambiguous name. I think she goes by Juniper Song and tries to kind of like imply that she is Asian. She's not. The story that she steals has primarily Chinese protagonists, and the story is just interesting. You get to see June kind of descend into madness as she feels like she is being haunted by the ghost of Athena while she continues to just make fucked up choices as the story carries on. It's nice seeing a character get their comeuppance, and I think this book has a lot to say about who should be telling what stories. I know that some people see this as self-insert, as R.F. Kuang, I guess, responding to critics throughout this book, and or, you know, just like using it to be cathartic or whatever. And you know what? I love to see it. I don't give a fuck. I don't care why this book was written. It's very clear to me that it was written with a lot of passion and that the story has a lot to say. I really enjoyed it, and it got me to like rethink some of the things that I have said about books in the past and how I interpret literature. It was just really phenomenal, and I think if you were in the book community online, I think you could benefit from reading this book. Personally, it was really great. I really enjoyed it. I loved all of these books. Frankly, I don't think I did the best job talking about them, but it's been a long day, and that's okay. I hope that you found something new to read from this list. I'd love to know in the comments down below what your best books of 2023 were. Can't promise I'm gonna read them, but you know, maybe I'll add them to my TBR for next year. Thanks so much for watching this video. I love y'all so much, and I'll see you tomorrow.